If your first instinct when something breaks is to fix it yourself. If you remember when MTV actually played music. And if you can parallel park without a backup camera. There's a good chance you grew up in a very different world than the one younger generations know today. A world where childhood looked a little rougher around the edges. Less supervised, less structured, and far less connected. For many people who grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, childhood came with a simple rule every summer morning. Go outside. Be back before dark. That was it. No phone. No GPS. No way for your parents to check where you were. You disappeared into the neighborhood for hours with nothing but your bike, your friends, and whatever you could invent to pass the time. To someone growing up today, that might sound unusual. But for Generation X, it was completely normal. Before we go further, think about which generation you belong to and whether childhood freedom looked like this for you. For Gen X kids, independence wasn't something parents gradually introduced. It was something the environment naturally demanded. You figured things out because there was no alternative. If you got lost on your bike, you found your way home. If you were bored, you invented something to do. If something broke, you tried to fix it. And if you failed, there wasn't always someone immediately stepping in to solve the problem for you. That kind of childhood created something powerful. It created problem solvers. But to understand why Gen X grew up this way, you have to look at the world their parents came from. Most Gen X parents were part of the silent generation or older baby boomers. Many of them had grown up in the shadow of World War II or during its aftermath. That generation valued resilience, responsibility, and practicality. Emotional conversations about feelings were less common. What mattered more was learning how to handle life. So when Gen X kids were given responsibilities early, it wasn't necessarily seen as unusual. Watching younger siblings, helping prepare meals, fixing a bike chain with whatever tools were available in the garage. These weren't extraordinary expectations. They were simply part of everyday life. But here's where things get interesting. Gen X childhood wasn't just shaped by parental attitudes. It was also shaped by something that's become rare today. Unstructured time. Lots of it. There were no smartphones. No streaming services. No endless online entertainment. Which meant boredom showed up often. And boredom did something important. It forced creativity. Kids built ramps out of scrap wood. They created imaginary worlds out of cardboard boxes. They turned sticks, dirt, and empty lots into entire universes. When you remove constant stimulation, the brain starts inventing its own. And over time, that habit builds resourcefulness. That's why many Gen X adults still approach problems with a certain calmness. They grew up in an environment where figuring things out was normal. But there's another piece of the story. Failure. In Gen X childhood, failure was part of the day. You fell off your bike. You got back on. You lost a game. You tried again tomorrow. There was very little cushioning between effort and outcome. Participation trophies weren't common. And while that sometimes made childhood tougher, it also created a different relationship with adversity. You learned early that effort mattered more than comfort. That persistence mattered more than perfection. But here's where the generational story becomes even more fascinating. Gen X isn't just known for independence. It's also known for adaptability. Because this generation grew up at the exact moment when the world was about to change dramatically. Think about the technology timeline. Gen X childhood often started in a fully analog world. Rotary phones, cassette tapes, handwritten letters, television with only a handful of channels. But by adulthood, the digital revolution had arrived. Computers, the internet, email, smartphones, social media. Suddenly, the world looked completely different from the one they grew up in. And Gen X had to learn both. They remember life without constant connectivity, but they also adapted to it. That makes them something unusual in generational history. A bridge generation. Older generations experienced the analog world, but often struggled to adapt to digital life. Younger generations grew up fully immersed in digital environments. But Gen X lived through both, which means they understand something many people today rarely experience. What life looks like when you can't instantly access everything. Waiting for a song on the radio. Calling a friend's house and hoping they were home. Looking up information in an encyclopedia. Patience wasn't optional. It was part of daily life. And that patience shaped how problems were approached. You had to try, then try again, then figure out another way. Because there was no search engine waiting to give you the answer. But here's the surprising part. The independence Gen X developed wasn't necessarily intentional. It was largely the result of the cultural environment at the time. During the 1970s and 1980s, many households had two working parents. After-school programs were less common. Neighborhoods often functioned as informal communities where kids watched out for each other. This created what some sociologists later called the latchkey generation. Kids coming home from school to empty houses, letting themselves in, making their own snacks, waiting for parents to return from work. At the time, it wasn't always seen as ideal, but it produced a generation comfortable with self-direction. Now compare that environment to the one younger generations are growing up in today. Childhood schedules are often structured. Activities are supervised. Technology fills empty moments. Parents communicate constantly through phones and messaging apps. The result is a very different childhood experience. Neither approach is inherently better or worse. They're simply products of different cultural environments. And those environments shape behavior in subtle ways. For Gen X, independence feels normal. For younger generations, collaboration and constant communication often feel more natural. Both approaches reflect the world people grew up in. That's the fascinating thing about generational psychology. When you look at adult behavior, you're often seeing the echo of childhood environments. The way someone handles stress, the way they solve problems, the way they approach independence. All of it can trace back to the conditions they grew up in. For Gen X, those conditions created something distinct. A generation comfortable figuring things out. Comfortable with quiet. Comfortable with uncertainty. But perhaps the most interesting trait of all is perspective. Because Gen X remembers something younger generations have never experienced. A world where life happened mostly offline. Conversations without phones on the table. Long stretches of quiet. Moments where waiting was unavoidable. That memory gives them a unique vantage point. They've seen how dramatically culture can change. And they know that what feels normal today can look completely different tomorrow. Once you start noticing generational patterns like this, they begin appearing everywhere. Stay curious about the generations.